The graduation field gleams with pride, but in the back row sits a woman who doesn't belong to this moment. Her cardigan is worn thin sleeves tugged low hiding ink that should have faded years ago. When the commander spots it just a shadow at her cuff, his speech stops mid-sentence. Not from confusion, from memory. The silence that follows isn't polite, it's reverent. It rolls across rows of white caps like a wave. He steps down, not toward the stage, toward her. Around her phone's rise breaths catch a ceremony begins to unravel, because the mark on her wrist. It belongs to a unit no one speaks of anymore. And the woman wearing it was never meant to be seen. Not here, not now. Mary arrived early, slipping through the gate with the first trickle of families. She chose the last row because it felt safer. No congratulations to deflect, no small talk. She carried a canvas tote whose corners were softened by years. Inside lay a small wooden box, its lid polished smooth by a thumb. She did not open it. She leaned forward and watched the seats fill faces, bright collars crisp. A mother across the aisle showed off flowers and a new bracelet. Mary smiled small and looked away. She traced the tote's seam with one finger and let the sun warm her cheek. She told herself to breathe. This was Tyler's day. It belonged to him, not to anything that came before. Before the base, before the crowds, Mary filled a different room with a quieter kind of courage. A clinic waiting area with plastic chairs, posters curling at the edges, a veteran with a cough she could hear across the hall. She checked vitals, asked about pain, listened longer than she needed to. A man noticed the callus on her palm and asked about it. She said she did a lot of lifting. He thanked her without knowing why the words shook him. Mary returned a prescription and smiled with her eyes. The clock ticked. She took late shifts. She folded her scrubs in a neat square. She let stories pass through her like weather. She never mentioned Ramadi. She never said metal. Tyler tightened the strap on his dress white and inhaled salt air. He ran a fingertip along the crease of his sleeve, counting under his breath. He thought of nights in the surf, lungs burning, legs refusing to quit. He thought of Mary's texts before dawn. Eat, rest, keep your head. He had never asked her what those words cost. He never guessed they were echoes. He believed she worked at a clinic and made soup on Sundays. He once teased her for the old watch she wore. She laughed and said it kept perfect time. Now he stood in the line beside men who had bled together. He wanted to make her proud. He believed he knew the shape of her pride. Mary kept the wooden box at the bottom of the tote wrapped in an old bandana. She felt the edge of it when her fingers searched for tissue. The touch sent a thrum up her arm. She had considered leaving it at home. She had placed it on the table, paced, returned it to the bag. The lid bore a faint scratch that formed a crooked cross. No one else would notice. She noticed every time. She had promised herself she would not open it today. Not in public. Not even alone. She would watch Tyler cross the stage. She would clap and go home. The box would remain closed like a room with a light turned off and a chair facing the wall. Commander Mitchell greeted the morning with a script he had written long ago. He knew when to pause, when to let pride catch its breath. He lifted a name and set it gently into the air. Applause rose, even respectful. His eyes skimmed the sea of faces and landed where they often did not. On the quiet ones, on the ones who seemed to hold their own weather. He saw the cardigan first, then the hand at the cuff, then the ink. It was almost nothing now, a ghost of a mark, line softened by time. Yet it hit him like a door opening. He lost his place. The printed words narrowed to a thin lane. He stepped off it without thinking. Mary felt his regard like sun through glass. Her chest tightened not with fear, but with recognition. She lowered her gaze to the ground, then lifted it to Tyler. He did not see her yet. He stared straight ahead, part of a perfect line. Pride wanted to rise in her throat. Memory stood beside it and pressed down. She held both. She remembered the faces in dust. She remembered the voices that never finished their jokes. She pressed her palms together until the tendons ached. She had trained herself to pass unnoticed, to be a wallflower against the world's loudness. The moment refused to let her fade. It asked her to stand. It asked her to be seen. She did not move. Near Mary, a young officer studied the ink that peeked past the cuff. Curiosity edged into awe. She had seen sketches of it in a binder once during a briefing on unit lineage. An old emblem retired, avoided, whispered more than spoken. The lines formed a cross made of two serrated blades. Some called it the Reaper Cross. Most acted like it never existed. She swallowed hard and looked from the cuff to Mary's face. The woman's eyes were steady but far away, as if focused on a horizon that no one else could see. The officer wanted to speak, to ask, to confirm what her chest already knew. She kept still. It felt like touching a live wire to say it aloud. The past was not a room for her. It came as flashes that refused to be arranged. A doorway blown inward, grit in her mouth, the copper scent that coated every breath. A hand reaching for hers with a laugh still on it. She had learned to let the flash flare and fade, to see it without getting lost. Today, a fragment returned sharper than usual. A street with no name, the sun a white coin overhead. She knelt beside a man whose lips were blue. Her hands moved on their own. She told him a joke she had once heard in a diner. He smiled around the pain. Then the air split and the world became a ringing bowl. Back in the bleachers, Mary pulled a small photo from her wallet. 4 faces dusty and bright arms thrown over shoulders. One wore sunglasses with a missing lens. One had a bandage across his ear. She touched each face with her thumb, then slid the photo away. Above her, flags lifted in the mild wind. A band warmed their instruments, soft notes curling like morning steam. She let the sound fill the space where memory had opened. She whispered the names and did not wait for answers. She never did. She fixed her gaze on Tyler again. He shifted his weight and set his shoulders. He looked older than yesterday. He looked exactly like a boy. She smiled small and did not wipe her eyes. Commander Mitchell walked toward the back row, script forgotten. The Marine beside him glanced for instruction and found none. A murmur rippled through the families and tightened. Mary rose halfway unsure, then settled back. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Mitchell stopped 2 steps away. He had not seen those lines in 20 years. He had hoped to never see them in a place like this. His voice was gentle, almost private. He said her name because the memory gave it to him. Not Mary. The other one, the one they had used when the world was a continuous siren. She flinched at the sound and then steadied. He bowed his head a fraction. The crowd did not understand why their chests hurt. Whispers stitched across the stands. Who is she? What is happening? Did something go wrong? A camera lens found Mary's face and fixed there. Another swept to Tyler, searching for an angle. A child asked if the ceremony was over. His father said no and kept his eyes on Mitchell. A veteran in a crisp cap sat taller in his seat, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He had seen this kind of pause before, where a routine turned sacred without warning. He placed his hand over his heart. He did not know why yet. He just knew reverence when it called the room to order. The breeze slowed. Even the gulls seemed to hold their lines against the sky. A man 2 rows up pushed to his feet, heel catching on a bag. His breath shortened. He had a scar that ran from temple to hairline. He did not notice it now. He stared at Mary with a stunned tenderness that made his hands shake. He said her other name, the one he had heard shouted through smoke. It tumbled out like a prayer. People turned toward him. He did not see them. He saw a street. He saw a field dressing pressed into a chest. He saw a woman whose voice cut through chaos and stitched a group of strangers into a team. He lowered himself back down, nodding like a man who had just recognized a long-lost relative. On the field, Tyler's composure cracked. He followed the commander's path with a tight jaw, eyes darting to the back row. He caught a glimpse of Mary's profile. The cardigan. The tote. The hand at her cuff. Something felt wrong and right at the same time. He felt heat flood his neck. He imagined mistakes, accusations, an embarrassment he could not name. He imagined, too, a secret he had never suspected. He bit the inside of his cheek to steady himself. The line held. The world narrowed to a tunnel between him and her. He had always thought he was the one being watched today. Now he watched her, and every step of his training felt suddenly delicate. Security shifted their stance, unsure whether to intervene or fade. Mitchell lifted a hand, a small signal to stand down. He moved closer to Mary, but not too close. Respect had its own distance. He looked at the cuff again. He looked at her eyes. He found the same thing in both places, a story carried, not displayed. He asked a question almost no one could hear. It was a year and a city. Her answer was a nod that contained 1,000 nights. Around them, the ceremony waited like a held note. Mary's breathing grew slow and deep, the way she had taught herself long ago when fear tried to climb her spine. The young officer nearby pressed her lips together and did not blink. Mitchell spoke low, though every syllable seemed to ring. "Reaper Cross," he said. "Ramadi, 206. Mary did not look down at her wrist. She kept her gaze even. Yes, the word was simple. It carried smoke, sand, and sirens. He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them with a wet shine. He did not ask for proof. He did not ask for permission to feel what he felt. He had been there, if not on her street, then on one just like it. He knew what that emblem meant when worn by a medic who had not left anyone behind. He straightened his shoulders and made a choice that would change the air for everyone present. Mary watched the choice rise in his posture. She understood the cost of public memory. She had avoided it for years. Yet Tyler stood in the sun, and some truths were not burdens. They were bridges. She nodded once, allowing the moment to pass through her instead of around her. She did not reach for the box. She did not roll back her sleeve. She let a single tear collect and then dry. Mitchell turned and faced the assembled families. He inhaled as if before a dive. Mary let her hands fall to her sides. Her shoulders squared. The world, which had felt like a tight hallway, opened like a door onto a long, bright beach. Mitchell walked back toward the podium without hurry. He did not look at his notes. He did not need a script to speak gratitude. When he reached the microphone, the first words caught. He cleared his throat. The speakers carried the ache to the far edges of the field. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "we will take a brief pause." The crowd held still, not in impatience, but in the kind of wondering that feels like respect. He lifted his head and looked out over the rows. He saw faces tilt, waiting to be shown what mattered. He decided to name it. He decided to place a marker in the middle of their planned joy and call it sacred. The rank and file of phrasing fell away. Mitchell spoke like a man in a room with one other soul. "Among us sits Mary Sullivan," he said. "Some of you know her as a mother. I know her as a medic whose courage bent the shape of a day." A hush deepened. "Mary Sullivan is a recipient of the Navy Cross." Gasps pricked the air. Hands flew to mouths. A name rippled through the bleachers. Tyler forgot to breathe for a second, then gulped a lungful like surf. The young officer closed her eyes in relief at the confirmation of her guess. The veteran with the ticking jawbone exhaled slowly, faith finding an object. The gulls wheeled once and kept their distance. Tyler's world tilted. He tried to slot the new words into old shelves and found no room. Navy Cross. That was not Clinic Soup Old Watch. That was heat shrapnel nights that swallowed men whole and returned them changed. He saw Mary beside him in memory, pouring coffee, wiping counters, humming to herself. He saw her now, upright, unhidden, seen by a man who had seen too much. Shame flickered for the questions he had never asked. Wonder followed bright and fierce. He looked at his hands and felt the weight of his own uniform in a new way. Pride arrived last slow and deep. It came not from glory, but from the steady fact of her. He straightened and faced the sun. Memory widened and took her. A street without shade. Walls scorched the color of old tea. Engines idled and then cut. Then the blast of light that shoved everything sideways. She tasted grit and iron. The radio spit vowels and numbers. She crawled, not upright, not a target. Hands found a wrist, a pulse that bucked like a trapped bird. Tourniquet, hide tight. Gauze pressed until her forearms shook. Voices fractured into single words. Medic here now. A second report boomed farther off. She counted breaths because counting steadied the world. A young man tried to sit up and failed. She told him to look at her and keep looking. He did. Heat blistered the sky. Sirens blurred in and out like a tide. Back on the bleachers, a petty officer in dress blues rose without planning to. His throat worked around a word he had kept folded for years. "Ma'am," he called, voice breaking the hush. "Outside Ramadi. The Humvee. You pulled me out when the ammo started to cook off." Heads pivoted. He pointed to a scar at his collar. "You wrapped this. You kept talking. You wouldn't let me close my eyes." His jaw trembled. "I made it home." "My daughter's 10. The last sentence landed like a bell. Nearby, someone exhaled a sob they had not meant to share. Mary did not cover her face. She nodded once, as if receiving inventory, not praise. The officer sat palms flat, steadying himself. The young officer near Mary found her voice. It came out small, almost private. "Ma'am, she said your after-action report from '06 was in my training packet. They taught us how to read wounds because of what you wrote. I joined because of that page." She flushed, surprised at herself. "I kept a copy in my locker. It reminded me that skills are a promise." She swallowed. "When I saw the ink, I thought it might be you." The words did not ask for anything. They hung there clean and grateful. Mary inclined her head. She did not claim ownership of the report. She did not disown it either. Tyler heard the exchange as if down a hallway, each word echoing. Tyler's lips moved before sound came. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hardly rose above breath, but he felt it shake his ribs. His teammate brushed his sleeve without looking away from the stands. "You okay?" Tyler nodded and lied. He had grown up on stories of regular days. Grocery lists, oil changes, bandages for scraped knees, not tourniquets for arterial spurts. He remembered teasing her about her calm in traffic. He remembered her telling him to count to steady his breathing. He thought it was a trick for tests. He stared at Mary now and understood those drills came from somewhere the sun did not reach. Heat gathered behind his eyes. He blinked hard and set his jaw again. Another memory opened, this one quieter. A living room with one lamp. An envelope on the table with a seal that caught the light. Mary broke it with careful fingers and read lines that made the room tilt. a date, a list of names, a citation styled for a podium. There was a request to appear to be photographed to accept applause. She set the paper down and sat very still. The television murmured without meaning. She folded the letter along its creases and slid it back into the envelope. She placed it in a drawer with manuals and spare batteries. The next morning she made coffee, called the number, and declined the ceremony. She used the calm voice that always got results. On the field, Mitchell felt language thin to essentials. He stepped close enough for Mary to hear, not close enough to crowd her. "You were there when I thought we were losing the whole block," he said, eyes steady. "You sent 2 to the case evac and stayed for the 3rd. I was the 3rd. He didn't wait for her to confirm the ledger. "I've owed you every sunrise since." The sentence sounded plain coming from him. It did not feel plain. Mary's mouth tipped in the smallest smile, the kind that refuses triumph. "You've paid it forward," she said. He shook his head once. "Not enough." He turned away, then, not to leave her but to carry her name to the front. Stillness settled over Mary like a shawl. Not hiding. Holding. She let the sounds of the bass pass through her, a flag line snapping a shoe scuff, a baby fussing, then quieting on a shoulder. She did not fidget with her cuff. She did not touch the box. She stood on both feet and allowed the crowd to see a whole person, not an emblem. Her breath smoothed itself into a pattern she trusted. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Somewhere in the stands, someone whispered her other name again, reverent now, not urgent. She did not flinch this time. Tyler watched her across the grass and learned something he had not known he was missing. Strength did not always move. Sometimes it stayed. Mitchell faced the formation and raised his hand to his brow. The salute rose crisp, a blade drawn in unison. It began with him, but it did not belong to him. It moved through the ranks like a wave and kept going row by row until even men on the far edge lifted their hands without waiting for command. Families followed in their own way, heads bowed, hands on hearts, backs straightened as if to carry a share. Mary did not return the gesture. She met it. Her eyes held each face they could hold. The air seemed to clear, bright and exact. Tyler's arm snapped up. The brim of his cap cut the light. Pride and humility poured into the same space. Phones had been quiet. Now they woke. A glow spread through the bleachers as people recorded what they could not quite name. A caption formed and reformed on screens. A mother, a medal. A salute. Across town, a coffee shop paused as someone turned up the volume on a live stream. A man on a couch texted his brother, "You need to see this." None of it touched Mary directly, not yet. She stood inside the moment like a circle drawn in chalk. Outside that chalk, the story moved at a speed she would never choose. The young officer lowered her phone, ashamed of needing it. She chose to memorize instead the angle of the light, the set of Mary's shoulders, the hush. When the pause loosened, a reporter edged down the aisle with a microphone lowered, not raised. He asked Mary for a word, promising to keep it brief, promising respect. She searched his face and found no malice, only hunger to carry what mattered. She offered him a single sentence. "I'm here for my son," she said. "This is his day." The reporter nodded and did not push. He looked at Tyler, then back to Mary. "He'll know," he said. "He knows now." Mary's smile touched her eyes, then faded to the calm she wore, like another layer of skin. The reporter stepped back and let the room reorder itself. The ceremony was not over. It had simply learned another meaning. Tyler broke from his place with a glance to his chief, who gave the faintest nod. He crossed the grass in measured steps and stopped a breath away from Mary. Up close, the cardigan looked softer than it had from the field. He saw a small freckle he had never noticed on her cheekbone. Words climbed and tangled. "Is it true?" he asked, voice thin with awe and grief he could not name. "Is it all true?" Mary did not reach for him, though she wanted to. She held his gaze and said, "Yes." The word settled his hands. He touched the tote, then pulled back, unsure what it carried. Behind them, the formation shifted, but held. The day had widened. Emotion found them both without mercy. Tyler's breath hitched and he tried to swallow it. The effort failed. Tears slid, not many, but enough to blur the edges. "I should have known," he said, and the sentence broke itself across his teeth. "You knew what you needed," Mary answered, steady. "You knew enough to keep going." He nodded without fully understanding. He wanted to apologize for being a child all these years, for not seeing what was in front of him. She would not have accepted it. She would not let his love turn into debt. He managed a smile that looked like a wince. She returned it, and the exchange said the rest. "I see you. I'm here. Keep standing." Mitchell approached with a microphone held as if it might bruise. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, shifting to the name on the program because the moment belonged to both versions of her. "Would you be willing to speak to the graduates?" The question carried 100 smaller questions about cost, about privacy, about who gets to tell which story. Mary looked to Tyler. He nodded, fear and pride braided in his face. She inhaled, once eyes on the sky, where a gull beat a clean line. "I will," she said. The words felt like stepping onto a bridge whose planks she had tested in the dark. Mitchell's shoulders eased. He turned toward the front and lifted the mic, his voice steady again. Mary stood where the podium did not dwarf her. She did not shuffle papers. She did not list achievements. Her hands folded, then settled at her sides. The wind tasted of salt and metal. She let it pass through her lungs, then set her voice on it. "Congratulations," she began, simple and true. "You have earned a place in a brotherhood and sisterhood that asks much and gives more." The graduates stilled, drawn by the way her tone carried both burden and relief. She did not elevate herself to reach them. She came down to where they were, on the edge of doing hard things for the first time. Tyler watched her mouth and heard lessons she had never spoken aloud. "I want to talk about loss," Mary said, and a murmur settled into listening. "Not as a headline, but as a fact you will learn to carry." She did not recount counts. She named no numbers. "Loss teaches you to make your time useful," she continued. "It will make you choose what to hold and what to lay down." Heads dipped not in gloom, but in assent. "You will remember faces," she said. "You will hear jokes that never found their endings." Her voice thinned for a heartbeat and then found itself. "You will go on anyway. That is not forgetting. That is honoring." A breeze lifted the flags and let them fall. The words held their shape without decoration. "I did not think I would see home again," Mary said. The admission fell clean, neither dramatic nor casual, but I learned something beside that fear. She let the pause do its work. "Your training is a promise, not armor. It will fail if you hide behind it. It will hold if you use it to reach others." She looked over the faces that would soon scatter to ships and teams. "Skill is love at work," she said. The sentence surprised even her with its clarity. She left it there and moved on. "You will have days when the plan burns away. On those days, keep one foot moving. Count your breath. Find someone else's hand and do not let go." She shifted and the crowd leaned with her without meaning to. "I kept my past quiet," she said. "Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted my son to become himself without my shadow." She let the graduates see Tyler in the line. You will have families in blood or in bond. Protect them from your legend. Share your lessons instead. Her eyes returned to the rows. Do not make your story their burden. Let it be their foundation. Tyler felt a surge of gratitude and something like relief. He had carried a hunger he couldn't name for years. Now he knew it was not for details but for purpose. Mary's words handed him that purpose with both palms open. Mary addressed the class with warmth that did not soften the truth. Teamwork is not a slogan. She said, it is trust built in dull hours and tested when seconds matter. She did not look at Mitchell, but he felt seen. Purpose is not a speech, she added. It is the decision you make before the decision you will be asked to make. She let those settle, then smiled without showing teeth. You will be tempted to measure yourself by noise. Don't. Measure by who breathes because you did your job. A ripple of understanding moved through the graduates. The lessons were field-sturdy, not polished for a poster. Mary's voice ran like clean water over stone knocking, nothing loose, revealing grain. She glanced once more at Tyler, then back to the ranks. We do not fight for fame, she said. We fight so others don't have to, echoing something she had told herself when the world narrowed to a tunnel of smoke and light. If you remember one thing from me, let it be this. Courage is quiet most days. It looks like showing up. It looks like listening. It looks like learning a name and using it. The words landed without fanfare. They did not need it. When you return home, keep serving, she said. Not with a title, with your hands. The sentence sat between the uniforms and the bleachers like a bridge no one had to be told to cross. Applause rose. First sparse, then full, as if the room relearned how to breathe together. Mary did not bow. She stepped back and let the sound pass over her like weather. Mitchell's expression held a steadiness that came from gratitude worn smooth by years. He did not try to frame what had just happened. He simply let it exist. Tyler clapped until his palms stung tears dried by the breeze. The young officer blinked fast and smiled at no one in particular. The veteran with the cap nodded, satisfied with the shape the day had taken. For a beat, the ceremony was a circle with no outside. People who had arrived as strangers shared a silence that felt like kinship. Faces told the rest. A mother pulled her son's shoulders back with pride she could not hide. A father wiped his nose and tried to pass it off as a cough. A graduate whispered something to the man beside him, both of them grinning with damp eyes. Mary let her gaze meet a dozen strangers and found the same expression waiting respect without curiosity. Their eyes did not pry. They honored. It eased something in her chest she had not noticed was tight. She breathed and felt the breath continue farther than usual, as if the air had more room now. Tyler caught her eye again and offered a small, boyish shrug that said imperfectly but perfectly, "Look what we did." Near the aisle, a boy of 10 tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Is she a superhero?" he whispered. His mother shook her head, smiling. "She's a person who did the right thing when it was hard." The boy seemed to weigh this and then nod. "I want to do that," he said. It was not an oath. It was a simple decision. Mary did not hear them, but the day heard them. Small seeds landed in places they could grow: a locker, a kitchen table, a quiet morning run. The ceremony moved forward, names called, diplomas given, promises made. Yet, everything that followed carried the shadow of what had been said and what had been shown. The shadow was light. After the crowd thinned, Mary and Tyler walked toward the water without planning to. The air cooled as the sun angled lower. Waves stitched and unstitched a white line on the sand. They stood side by side, not touching at first. Tyler's breathing found a slower rhythm. He had lived in a small map of his mother, today had added new towns, new roads. He did not know them yet. He would learn them by walking. "You hungry?" Mary asked, ordinary as ever. Tyler laughed, surprised by the relief in the question. "Starving." They watched a gull land and then lift. Quiet filled in where speeches had been. It did not feel empty. It felt like the world making room for next steps. They sat on a low wall and shared a sandwich he had tucked into his pocket hours before. The bread was flattened, the lettuce tired, and it tasted perfect. Tyler asked softly, "Were you scared?" Mary chewed, swallowed, and nodded. "Of course," she said. "Fear keeps you honest." He stared at his boots. "How did you not show it?" She folded the paper wrapper into a small square. "I did show it," she said. "I kept moving anyway." He let that sit. The tide slid closer, then away. "I wish I'd asked sooner," he said. "You asked today," she replied. "That's soon enough." He breathed out and looked at her hand steady on her knees, capable of gentleness that had survived fire. Tyler reached into his pocket again and drew out his graduation trident, warm from his skin. He held it between them, the metal catching late light. "I want you to keep this," he said. Mary shook her head, a reflex. "It's yours." He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "It came because of you," he said. "Not your shadow. Your example." She studied the small symbol, then looked at him. "Then I'll keep it for now," she said. "Bring it back to me when you've put your own weight into it." He smiled at the bargain. It felt right. He slid his hand into hers, not as a child, not as a soldier, but as both at once. Days later, Mary unlocked the clinic before sunrise. The waiting room yawned awake with fluorescent hum. 2 new volunteers stood at the door, both veterans starting fresh chapters. She handed them clipboards and coffee, then showed them where the good bandages were kept, the ones that held through sweat and stubbornness. She taught them the count and breathe trick. She taught them to ask people where it hurt, and then ask again. A young woman with a nervous smile admitted she had never drawn blood. "You will," Mary said, calm and certain. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Inside, small lives were tended to with skill that looked like kindness. Mary hung her cardigan on the back of a chair and rolled up her sleeves. That evening, she took down a photo from the clinic wall and wiped the frame with the hem of her shirt. The 4 faces still laughed at something unheard. She placed the photo on a shelf above the supply cabinet where she could see it without having it seen for her. Across town, Tyler laid out his gear with care he had learned long ago at her kitchen table. He checked each piece twice, then once more for luck, though he did not believe in luck like he used to. He texted his mother a picture of the bag zipped and ready. She replied with a thumbs up and the old watch emoji. He grinned, the old joke still new. On the morning of Tyler's departure, they met in the parking lot where rides begin and end. The sun was not yet past the buildings. Their breath showed in small clouds, though the day would grow warm. Tyler hugged her longer than usual. "I won't let you down," he said into her hair. She leaned back to see his face. "You never have," she answered. He nodded, accepting the correction like a gift. A horn sounded. Time pressed. He shouldered his bag and stepped away, then turned back once more. Mary lifted her hand in a simple wave. No speeches, no instructions. He walked toward the bus and she stood until the doors closed and the street became itself again. On his first flight out, Tyler stared at the oval window and let the horizon move. He replayed his mother's voice not as a speech, but as a rhythm. Show up, listen, learn the name, keep someone breathing. He had carried many mottos through training. This one felt like a home address. He wrote it in small letters inside his notebook. Back at the clinic, Mary rinsed a tray and looked out at the street where morning unfolded in ordinary ways. Vendors set up. A man walked a dog. A kid rode a bike with a wobbly wheel. She felt the ache that comes after a good cry and did not push it away. It reminded her she was still open. The day settled into itself. News clips traveled without their permission, but the people who mattered held the story close, telling it at tables and in trucks, changing only the parts that were theirs to change. Mary kept the trident in a drawer she opened once, then closed with a nod. She wore the old watch and made the rounds. Tyler stepped into a place where new maps begin. He found his team, learned their voices, learned their silences. Somewhere, a boy told his sister about a woman who did the right thing when it was hard. The world did not shift on its axis. It held steady, which was the point. Some heroism is noise. The rest is a hand that stays.